Now we'll just wait for everybody to join us. And I just want to let the audience know that we'll be starting here in about 30 seconds or so. Just wait for everybody to come in and take a seat. Grab your coffee. All right. Good morning and welcome to the Arizona Capital Times Morning Scoop. I'm Gary Grotto, the executive editor of the Arizona Capital Times, and we're here today to discuss education funding with 5 school district superintendents from across the state. As we speak, leaders in the Arizona legislature are working on next fiscal year's budget, and who knows what surprises are going to come out of that. But what we do know is that according to the Joint Legislative Budget Committee's April report, they're projecting a $5.3 billion surplus, $1.6 billion in ongoing revenue and $3.7 billion in one-time money. Our panel has been meeting for weeks and talking about the opportunity the surplus is going to provide to public schools. But first, we want to thank our sponsor, Stanfield Children Arizona. Stand for Children Arizona is a unique catalyst for education equity and racial justice to create a brighter future for all. They advocate for policies and funding to increase educational success for all students, ensure the policies and investments they help pass make the impact intended, elect candidates committed to education, and enable parents to be at the forefront of affecting change. Stan wants to thank the panelists for their insight and dedication to Arizona students. And as a little disclaimer, we have provided this forum to discuss issues and ideas that are important to our state, but the views expressed today are those of the panelists and are not necessarily embraced or endorsed by the Capital Times. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists. First up, we have Melissa Saydorf. She's the superintendent of Stanfield Elementary School District, which is located in Pinal County and has an enrollment of 385 students. Melissa has been an educator for almost 3 decades. In the past decade, she's focused on advocating for rural education and rural leaders. In that venue, she's involved with local, state, and regional organizations to help raise awareness on unique challenges that rural educators face. And she hosts a podcast, The Rural Scoop. Is that the name of it?
It is.
It is. Okay. So a little plug there for you, which explores rural issues and holds monthly superintendent virtual roundtables to ensure rural voices are being heard. Good morning, Melissa.
Good morning, Gary. It's great to be here. Thanks for having us.
From the southwest corner of the state, we have Gina Thompson. She's the superintendent of Yuma Union High School District, which has 6 schools. Another one's being built and 11,000 students. Gina has worked for the district for 32 years, the last 4 as superintendent. Her career started in Yuma at Cibola High School and included stops at Yuma High School and Kofa High School before she moved to district administration. Good morning, Gina, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, thank you.
Also joining us is Greg Wyman, who heads J.O. Combs Unified School District, which has 10 schools in Santan Valley and more than 4,000 students. Greg's been at J.O. Combs for 3 years and has led districts throughout the state from Tempe to Snowflake to Payson, Apache Junction since 1999. Welcome, Greg.
Thanks, Gary. Pleasure to be here.
And from Holbrook Unified School District, we have Robert Korporich, where he oversees 5 schools and 1,800 students. Robert has been in education for 30 years, 10 of them in the classroom and 20 in administration. This is his 13th year at Holbrook. Robert is also on the West Ed Board of Directors, and he's a board member of the Arizona Rural School Association, and he's on the State Board of Education Certification Advisory Committee. Good morning, Robert, and thank you for being here.
Good morning, Gary, and good morning, everyone.
And our last panelist is Scott Manzel. He's the superintendent of Scottsdale Unified School District, which has 30 schools and 21,000 students. Scott joined the district on July 1, 2020, after spending 9 years as the superintendent of Washtenaw Intermediate School District in Michigan. Before that, he led the Livingston Educational Service Agency in Whitmore Lake Public Schools. And according to the district's website, Scott is driven by the moral imperative to provide opportunities that are equitable, inclusive, and just for all students. And he says the work is achieved by working collaboratively with local, state, and national partners. Good morning, Scott.
Good morning, Gary. Thanks for the opportunity.
And before we begin the discussion, I want to encourage the audience to submit your questions through the chat and participate with our panelists. It's more fun that way. So please do that. And let me start with Gina, and anyone can add to the conversation at any time. Can you just give us a brief overview on the state of education funding in Arizona?
Wow. Well, as that's a very big question. And as far as the state of funding, we're poised in a position right now with with the opportunity with funds available, we're poised in a place to get to a much stronger position for the state of Arizona education funding. Obviously, per pupil funding, we rank very low in the United States, and I'm anxious for the opportunity to talk today about increasing the base funding model with the dollars that are available and being great partners with the entire state.
And Gary, if I could jump in, I think the biggest issue with the state of funding in Arizona is I don't think sometimes people realize the importance of public education in terms of an economic driver for the state of Arizona. When we sit and look at all the kids in K-12 in Arizona, 94% attend public schools, either traditional school districts or charters. And we probably pump somewhere in the neighborhood of $6 billion into the economy. And we are an industry that's dependent on people. So 80 to 85% of our dollars go towards salaries. So basically we put money in the pockets of hard-earned Arizonans who then go ahead and put it back into the economy multiple times over. NAU did a study in 2012 on the impact of Flagstaff Unified into the Flagstaff economy. And they showed there's a ripple effect of the dollars that are spent by school district employees in local communities. So we're driving local communities, especially rural, but our districts like Scott's are some of the largest employers, even in major urban and suburban areas of the state. And so it's critical that people understand just how much we are part of a strong economy and a strong Arizona. And so when we look to invest dollars into public education, you're investing dollars into the state, you're investing dollars into the strong economy. Our kids sit and they're the frame or the foundation of workforce development. Either you're going to have students that are taking their first jobs at entry-level positions, or you're going to have CTE programs where you have kids that are leaving with either certifications or associate degrees and entering into the workforce immediately from high school. So when you look at what school districts are all about in Arizona, I think the misnomer is the idea that we're not as strong a player in the local economy or the state economy as we are. And therefore, when we have this robust economy and we look to put money in, we think this is a way to solidify the system that we have. And so as Gina alluded to, when we talk about 860 million into the base, or and at minimum additional 200 million into capital, or what we call district additional assistance, that becomes critical for creating a more stable system for school systems throughout the state. It also creates a situation where we can be more predictable in what we're going to do when we go ahead and look long term. And so we just think those kinds of ideas are really critical to make the state and continue the state to have the strong economy that we currently have.
And I'll follow up on that, Gary, and just say that Greg is absolutely right, especially in our rural counties, which are all those except Pima and Maricopa, where you have school communities that are the heart of that rural area, and they are the main economic driver within that economy. And if you don't have a strong school, your economic platform is really going to suffer. We've seen and we've had discussions around what happens when you have a school that starts to decline in terms of enrollment, or the funding isn't where it needs to be. What happens is that town can eventually die. We've seen mining towns historically here in Arizona that have gone away or have struggled to continue to exist when that school is having some problems. So it is very important to recognize, as Greg said, that we are a part of that workforce development in our communities and rural areas as well.
And if I could just take it back to the current funding model, 1980 model for funding education. And I would venture to say there's no other business that does everything the same as they did in the 1980s. And even with that funding model, if you look at the data for grad rate, college going rate, dropout rate, the innovations that have gone on throughout Arizona in education, it's actually quite incredible. And I would just want to comment too on Greg's word. He really, it hit me, the predictable. It feels so unpredictable and off-putting and unsettling during these sessions where we just don't know, currently waiting on a budget in order to offer contracts to employers. So the state of it, it feels just always up in the air about this time of year, and we're just really need to do something that's sustaining and that our children can count upon.
Yeah, I think that, when you talk about, education funding and the economy, it seems like the conversation is always about the future and getting these kids, ready for the economy or ready to work and have a productive economy. But, I haven't heard too many conversations about, education, the industry, and as an economic driver. So can we just go around the table here real quick? And, there's, as I mentioned earlier, there's a $5.3 billion surplus, 1.6 for ongoing and 3.7 one time. So can you talk about your unique challenges to your districts are facing right now that could be addressed with this surplus? And let's start with Melissa and Robert, because they're both rural districts, and they're not the same. One size does not fit all. And I picked up on that when I was listening to your podcast. Robert has dormitories. I don't think Scott has dormitories, but I imagine that's very expensive and very unique need. And so can you both talk about the differences in your rural school districts and your unique needs and what the surplus can do for it?
Sure. I thanks, Robbie. I appreciate that you recognize that rural is not a monolith. That's a term that I like to use. We tend to lump rural as just rural, but if you've seen one rural school, you've just seen one rural school. There is context and they are all unique. My particular challenges in my area, as you said, I'm under 400 students. I have a single site, which means there's just one school in my district, but we're 600 square miles. So it's very dispersed. 20% of my population comes from the Tohono O'odham Reservation, which means that we're pulling Native students into our community as well. And our number one challenge has been throughout the pandemic and even before, broadband access. And that is a challenge that we are continuing to try to address. There's some innovative ideas out there that I know we'll get in a conversation around later, but trying to ensure that students have broadband in the home is something that we're challenged with right now. Additionally, trying to attract teachers to my community and classified hourly employees as well, especially drivers, has been a challenge. And these dollars would allow me to be more innovative in how I'm attracting. And then once I have them under contract, keeping them. That's a challenge as well, especially when other communities in my county, Pinal County, are able to offer more for a contract than I am for a teacher. It's difficult to try to compete. And then I also have a high number of migrant students in my school community. And so they are in and out of the classrooms throughout the year, depending on growing season. And so trying to ensure that those students have the supports they need while they're with me and when they come back is something that we're looking to address as well. I know Robbie's challenges are different than mine. So Robbie, I'll let you speak to those.
Thanks, Melissa. If you don't know where Holbrook, Arizona is, which probably some people don't, we're right on I-40. I say it's right next to heaven. I've been here 20 years and love Holbrook. It grows on you. It's very diverse. It's very challenging. We span 1,500 square miles as a district boundary. So we are a very large transportation district. We run 27 buses a day, over 500,000 miles a year. So we transport our kids. Some of our kids get up at 5:30 in the morning to get on the bus by 5:45, 6 o'clock. And if they're doing sports and activities after school, they're getting home about 8 o'clock at night. Our kids are resilient. They're tough kids. They really challenge themselves to get a high quality education, and they choose the Holbrook Unified School District, which we're excited about. We have about 1,800 students in our district. We are at declining enrollment, just like most rural school districts. I believe most of them are declining in enrollment at this point. We employ 280 staff members. So we are the largest employer in our community, and education as a whole is in our county. Some of our challenges are the poverty rates that we have, and the services that we provide to our students and our families is paramount to their success, to generational success, and to overcoming some of their challenges. And then we also border the Navajo Nation. So we are also serving a high population of Native American students. It's a great place to help our unique students develop. That's what our motto is. That's what our theme is for our district. Love being here and love serving the kids. Some of our challenges are, as Melissa mentioned, I'd say our top three are teacher recruitment and sustainability of teachers. Right now, we're hiring about 11 teachers, and about 40 to 50% of those teachers are non-educational, are coming from outside the field of education. So they have a sociology degree, they have a psychology degree, they have a business degree, and they're coming back and saying, yeah, I would love to teach. And so we're hiring those teachers, which are really good people. Now the challenge is to make them really good teachers. And so we build those resources around that as a new challenge, because we see that year after year that the universities are not producing enough teachers. The markets are not good enough that we can recruit other teachers from out of state, which we used to do, but we don't do that much anymore because they're staying at home. And so we have to grow our own. That's a major challenge for us, which is an investment. There's a cost associated with that. I think also sustainability of resources. Arizona has done a really good job over the last 5 or 6 years to start infusing money into the state education system. We have a lot of room to grow, but I believe that we're on the right track. And I think this year can be a banner year for us in Arizona to really increase the base level support and be able to provide some sustainability. I'll give you just one example, is technology. We have put a tremendous amount of technology in the last 2 years with 2-to-1. Kids get a computer at home and at school, so that there's connectivity at both sides. But those are going to need to be replaced. And that's a huge investment that we were using some of our ESSER funds that are going to go away. And so how do we sustain some of those resources? Minimum wage is another concern for us, to how we can continue to sustain 50-cent raises, 70-cent raises, whatever it might be that inflation is in each January. It's really concerning to be able to keep the top end of our support staff equal to the bottom end of our support staff. So the positions based off of what the salary rates are. So that's sustainability is something that I have a concern about, because we've made some good investments, but they all need to be sustained. And then another big challenge for us, and I think this is very much a rural issue, is capital. We have 60-year-old buildings. We have a building right now at one of our elementary school that has a crack in the wall that you can put your finger through. And that's it. We've already done the estimates. It's going to cost about $6 to $7 million to fix the wall and do the building envelope. where we could probably either build a new school or we could remodel in one of our other schools to combine a school, which, you know, we would be okay with, but there's not funding sources for that. We don't have the ability to bond out to be able to do those kind of things. And SFB, you know, is struggling with some of their monies. As much as has been infused into SFB, there's a lot of needs. And so we're at a dilemma right now. How do we address those kind of problems? And so capital is going to be another 5-year problem for us if we don't find a solution to it. So I'd say those are some of the biggest challenges that we have in rural Arizona right now.
Ina, you want to take the floor?
Sure. So as you indicated, Yuma Union High School District serves right at 11,000 students. We're unique in that we're a larger district, considered rural on some charts and not rural on others because of our size, but our location limits, you know, our ability to take resources from central Arizona, for example. So we're very happy to be a collaborative community. 7 elementary districts feed into Yuma Union, and we work very well together as superintendents and districts. We have a consortium for our transportation with District 1 as well as our IT. So that's positioned us very well. And I'd like to echo the beginning of the last 5 years of just, you know, starting to infuse dollars back into education. Really thankful to the governor, for example, for supporting the 7th high school, which is on the road right now to being built. But you know, again, the predictability and continuing that trend is really of concern. We some of our unique challenges, but also celebrations, quite honestly. I absolutely love our community and our district because there is so much diversity, but we serve over 40% of our families are low income. So we have a pretty significant poverty level. All of our schools are Title I, which again is also cause for celebration because we have lots of kids learning to work with lots of other kids from different socioeconomic status. We do have over an 89% minority rate in our district, again, a celebration, 86% grad rate and a 2.9% dropout rate. So lots of celebrations, and a lot of things that we're able to do are about working together. We also are a 1-to-1 district and started that before COVID. But with all of that and the innovations, our recruitment and retention of teachers and staff, as everyone's talked about, is definitely a challenge. And again, even if you go out and about, there aren't a lot of folks coming out of university and colleges ready. So we're really excited about working with folks in industry. I would say also a real current, and it's not sure when it's going to end, but just the supply chain and being able to be competitive as a purchaser and getting the supplies here, which is another reason to really look for sustainability over time of funding. I feel like our challenges are similar. It really comes down to people and the dollars to continue to invest into that for sustainability.
All right. And who wants to go next, Greg or Scott?
I'll defer to Scott.
Thank you, Greg. So very quickly, in Scottsdale, we have just under 22,000 pre-K through 12 students. And some of our challenges are exactly the same as what you're hearing in the rural communities. We struggle to attract and retain talent. We're competing not only with other schools in the valley, but we're competing with employers in Scottsdale and the surrounding area. So when it comes time to hire individuals for nutrition services, they can take a job working at one of our fast food restaurants for $15 an hour. They don't have the retirement deduction from their paycheck, and they're getting signing bonuses. So we struggle there. We struggle finding people who want to drive bus every day. We have 1,500 teachers in the district. Next week, we'll be celebrating 90 retirements in Scottsdale. So the churn is constant, and it's a real issue for us. The other big ticket item is the inflationary impact on our ability to carry out some voter approved bond projects. So in 2016, the voters approved more than $200 million of construction The estimated cost for rebuilding elementaries was about $200 per square foot. The final projects that are starting at this juncture, it's now $396 per square foot. When you think about the inflationary impact that everyone is experiencing, from our staff to our community, it impacts our ability to carry out some of these bond projects and other things. So the historic revenue increase that's available in the state budget is coming at a time where the need is also pronounced because of these inflationary considerations. So I think when we look at all of the challenges across rural and suburban and urban, we're swimming in the same sea, but we're working towards a common objective to ensure all of our students, whether they're in Scottsdale or rural and remote Arizona, are prepared to be successful as they move from the educational system into meaningful employment. And so that investment really does pay dividends in terms of economic development, and we have a critical role to play in workforce development. And I think that's part of the story that really needs to be emphasized. If we underinvest in the public education system, we will pay a long-term price in terms of economic viability for the state of Arizona.
And I'll go ahead and finish up and just say again, very similar to what everybody else said. We're having the same struggles. Probably one of the other issues we have in a more urban, suburban area will be just competition. We face where we have about 50% of our kids going to other places, be they charter schools or other school districts. A lot of other districts very close to us. And so competition becomes critical. And I think when we have these conversations, when we talk about the budget in general, again, we're appreciative of the monies that legislature and the governor have given to us. If we talk 20 for 20, or we talk the increase in counselors and increase in social workers, if we talk the increase in the square footage for construction costs with SFB, that has been critical for us. But this is the next step that we need to do. And we're talking base level increases, because I think what you're finding, although there's commonalities, there's uniqueness to all of us. And so therefore, by placing it into the base, the two key things that we will do, which can speak to what Scott and some of the others said, is first of all, it becomes inflationary. So at least it's built on some inflation. I'll get back to that in a second. But secondary, it's more flexible for the districts to do what they need to do that's unique to the situation that they're in. And I think the more restrictive you get with funding that comes into school districts, the harder is at times, because we're all very unique and it's not as simplistic. Everybody wants to remember schools as their one-room schoolhouse or the classrooms that they went to, but we're talking about multi-million-dollar organizations that employ vast amounts of people that have a variety of different needs based on socioeconomic status, ethnicity, or any number of different issues. So I think the more flexibility with the funding, the better it is for all of us as districts. Even the inflation factor, we're talking about an inflation situation where if it goes into the base, we get inflation of approximately 2%, no greater than 2%. Yet we know in January, we will get and have to pay a minimum wage increase that's going to be indexed off of a different inflation factor. And that increase, like it was this past January, will probably be close to 5%. So the inflation that's given to us on our money coming in will not keep pace with the inflation that's mandated under the law for minimum wage. So we're working in a deficit model just based on inflation. But at least we know if it goes into the economy or into the base, we have some inflation coming, and that will help us plan ahead of time. So I think flexibility is key as you listen to five of us talk about very similar issues, but very unique based on where they are. The struggle to get employees is real, but it's different when you're saying, hey, will someone move to Holbrook, Arizona versus someone will move to Scottsdale? You have a housing issue because there's not as many houses in Holbrook, but in Scottsdale, you have a pricing issue for housing. So even though we're trying to attract people, you may have people driving distance to the community for different reasons based on location. And so that flexibility within how we deal with issues like special education or poverty weights or opportunity weights, whatever you want to call them, becomes critical for us to allow us to maximize what our strengths are in order to continue to serve our communities.
So it sounds like, I mean, with this surplus, any money you get from it, you would also like to see some policy changes as far as the funding formula and so forth.
Well, I'll jump in first. I
Yeah.
just think as Gina related to that, the funding formula for traditional public schools has some real strong points, but is a 1980 plan. And so it has been band-aided over the years, and we have to take a look at how do we fix this. There's generally a question that's raised in many circles about how much is too much. All you ever do is ask for more.
Mhm.
And the point I would say to that is if you go back 10, 20, 30, 40 years, is the cost of gas, the cost of food, the cost of a car, the cost of the house, more or less. It's obviously significantly more. There's never going to be a point in time for any organization, I don't care what you're doing, including state and federal and local government, where you're going to be able to put a dollar amount and never have to put any more money in, because the cost of living always increases. So you're always going to have to give more. If we could change the formula and update the formula, we could create a system that is more sustainable and more predictable, both for the legislature, quite frankly, and the governor, as well as school districts. So I think we got to take the strong components of the current system or formula and then update them for what's taking place in the real world that we live in today. And I think that will make life a little bit easier. So it doesn't appear that we're always asking for more, but the reality is, as Robbie said, with technology, initially in technology, it costs more. That's one of the prices that has gone down. The cost of computer is less, but before you just had one lab that every kid went to. Now you have to give every student a computer. So the replacement, the infrastructure, the broadband, the firewalls, all that stuff is expensive. And so we're always going to have to ask for more, just like any business does, just like the government does, because the cost of living is going up. We just want to make sure, how do we become more predictable? And how do we address the true increase of inflation so that we can go ahead and do what we need to do?
And I would just want to build a little bit from an outsider's perspective, having been in Michigan for the prior 18 years as a superintendent and 2 years here now. Michigan funds public education at a higher level than Arizona. So that was a surprise to me. But we were looking to implement a weighted formula, much like Arizona has, in order to address the added cost of providing certain services to certain groups of students. So special education weight or an opportunity weight for students in poverty. Those are all things Michigan was looking at. So when we consider what we need in Arizona, it's about both increasing the base to ensure sustainability and predictability, but also recognizing that it costs more to provide the educational services for some of our most vulnerable students. And if we're truly committed to educating all and providing the access and opportunity for them to reach their full potential, then we have to look at how we structure the funding in order to accomplish that.
Yeah, I would say, going back to is there a need for policy change? I don't know that there's a need necessarily for policy change, but adding funding into the base and also additional weights and eliminating any additional reporting, because as a small district, we are finding that we're becoming overwhelmed with the amount of reporting, whether that's federal and state, in terms of trying to just have the human resources to be able to keep up with it. And we keep, like, for example, the minimum wage, that's a major impact to our HR department to study that out and rescale it and so forth. So there are some things that are happening in public education that are causing more of an administrative burden to manage and to regulate. So putting money into the base and putting money into the weights, I think helps us to have a flow into the revenue, with us being able to use that funding the way that we see our local governing boards see fit, and to be able to produce the return on the investment at the local level, to be able to utilize it the way that we believe in our local economy, because we're all different. We've already identified that, right? So we all are going to spend the money in a different way, but having that flexibility to spend it, having the flexibility for innovation, and then just having less administrative burden for reporting. We have a very, very efficient system, I believe, in the state of Arizona and in education in general. We have annual audits, we have performance audits, we are so technical in the way that we operate our business, that is ran in a very efficient and effective manner that has a lot of oversight. And so just infusing that money into the base, and there could be an opportunity to put historical levels of funding into the base level support this year. And we believe that's the right direction to go.
And I'll just piggyback off of what Robbie's talking about. The other component to that administrative burden is people want to understand what is going on with their dollars. And so being transparent about what we're doing, we welcome accountability. We want to make sure that we are good stewards of this taxpayer money that we're in charge of ensuring is put to the best use based on the needs of our students and our school community. So we're highly accountable to the monies that are appropriated to us. We have budget hearings every fiscal cycle throughout the budgeting process. We have completion reports for all of our grants so that we are held accountable to how we are using both federal and state dollars for our grant monies. And overall, I would say we do a very good job being accountable to our taxpayers. The other thing I want to make sure that we take a look at is what Robbie said. I don't think it can be understated, the burden of the paperwork, especially in a rural district. I'm a superintendent, but I also serve as the business manager, and I also operate federal and state grants. And for one person to have all of that accountability paperwork, it's a tough haul. Now, am I complaining about it? No, I welcome the opportunity to make sure that I'm being a good steward of that funding that benefits my students in my school. But we want to make sure that we are not being too restrictive in how those funds are being utilized at the same time that we're not overburdening our district offices with how we're being asked to report out those funds.
I think Scott said yesterday that he has a staff to do those reporting, right?
Right. We all have the same reports required. Some people are wearing multiple hats, and I fortunately have people who can do that. And it's an additional burden the smaller the district is.
And I think also when you talk about that administrative burden, it ultimately, the more restrictive, the more administrative burden, the less goes into the classroom. At the end of the day, it affects students directly because it takes dollars away from what could be in that classroom, either another teacher or additional funding, and it affects students directly.
And if I can give just one example of that is capital funding. If we were to put money back into capital funding at a per pupil allocation, or we put it into district additional assistance, and that was a flow right into the district based off of the formula versus what has gone to the school facility board. So I need a project manager. We hired a project manager just to be able to keep up with, the building renewal application, the assessments, and it's great. It's wonderful. SFB has really helped us to improve some of the conditions in from air conditioning to, building renewal of our facilities and so forth. But it's a process, and it takes a lot of time and energy and somebody to be able to do that. And in a small district, that's not able to be done easily with the personnel that we already have. So it's the difference between the free flow of money into district additional assistance or capital versus going through a grants application and having to go through all of those steps, which takes time for that to occur. And that's just one example of how the two systems of free flow money into the base versus going through a grant system works at least in rural school systems, and I think across every school system.
But I would caution everybody to understand that the work we're doing with this administrative burden, the Auditor General does an annual report that talks about classroom dollars in the classroom, and then the average in the country is 11%. The average in the state since 2000 has been 10%. So when you talk about administrative costs, we are doing this work with less resources than, quite frankly, the private sector, who generally spend about 20% on administrative costs. When we talk about those administrative costs, we're talking about both site and district. And we're talking about not just the salaries of the superintendents, but we're talking about the payroll. We're talking about administrative assistants. We're talking about benefits, all of those things that run a district. And we're operating at approximately 10%. Which is phenomenal when you take a look. That means that 90% of our budgets in one fashion or another are going towards kids, whether it's transportation to bring them to school, it's food service to feed them, it's classroom aides, it's librarians, it's nurses, it's teachers, it's coaches, It's all of those things. 90% of all the dollars in Arizona public education go to kids. And the administrative burden and the bureaucracy administration, as hard as it is being done on 10% or less. And that is pretty significant when you look and compare that to other areas. And so I would just caution as we have this conversation that everybody truly understands what portion of what budget goes where. And we're operating on a very thin margin when it comes to administrative costs.
Gary, can we go back to, you mentioned the policy changes. What we didn't discuss are, the elephant in the room is the aggregate expenditure limit.
That was my next question.
And its impact, we saw it in real time this year. And again, it goes back to the 80s, and the intent in the 80s and our reality today are two different things. And so even if we get increases in funding, there's a limit in terms of what we can spend. So I think it's really important to put on the table. We need to fix permanently the aggregate expenditure limit in order to avoid the challenge that we saw this year and the recurring pattern of where it can be held up for political purposes, when in fact, what we need to do is ensure we're providing the resources so that our students get the education they need and deserve. We've got Prop 301, which previously had been exempted from the AEL aggregate expenditure limit, and now it's included in that. And that's a big chunk of why we exceeded the threshold this year. And we've got a funding cliff in Prop 123. And not everyone realizes these things are on the horizon, but we have to think about that as leaders of our school systems, and they can be significant in terms of the overall impact on our systems and our ability to deliver results for our students. And so I think from a policy perspective, those are some of the big issues that we need to address.
And just to follow up on another elephant in the room that I saw in the chat, and that's the ESAs, the Empowerment Scholarship Accounts. We live in a state of choice. And we also understand that 95% of our families choose a public education option. And that is a fact. And we're proud that we are able to work with our families to ensure that their students have what they need while they are in our schools. Arizona voters are familiar with ESAs because they have rejected them at the ballot for the last couple of election cycles. And so I think that the conversation needs to be around how can we use these monies that are in front of us now, not just in the ESA realm, but really, as everyone has mentioned, how can that be applied to the base so that all students can benefit across the state and we are able to have a more stable and sustainable funding stream for all students to benefit. And so, I think we would be missing the boat if we didn't say we recognize that we do provide choice, and 95% choose that public school option.
So what portion of the surplus can be sustainable, and what portion should be one time?
Gary, I'll tackle that a little bit. Just doing a little bit of research on historic rates. We were frozen from 2019 to 2013 with the base level support of around $3,200. We started to increase a little bit, and from 2012 to 2014, and a little bit in 2015. And then we had a significant bump of $227 bump around 2015, 2016. So we've had a slow increase since then. We're about $4,400 now. Based off of the surplus and the investment in education, I think we could put $400 into the base level support, $500 million into base level support. And I believe that, you never know what next year and the next year and the next year might bring, but that would be able to bring some sustainability and stability to school districts, which that'd get us close to just under the $5,000 per pupil mark, which I think would be significant for Arizona based off of the economic situation that we're in right now. And then in addition to that, some opportunities for special education funding. The Arizona Department of Education just came out with their study yesterday, and special education has increased 15% in their study, and we haven't increased special education funding. We slowly chipped away. Again, we're being progressive in the state of Arizona, which is wonderful. It's motivating for school superintendents and educators in Arizona to see the investment. But we need to accelerate that because we are in a bit of a catch up. And I think we're a bit of a microcosm of what we've seen over the last 2 years with the economy in nationwide and worldwide. Is we've got to catch up now, right? We're in the lag stage. So now we have the opportunity to catch up and to be able to provide ample resources that would be able to help us to innovate and be creative and become more competitive in the public sector. So special education weights increase would be a great opportunity for the state of Arizona. Like Scott had mentioned, maybe an opportunity weight, a poverty weight for those students that are, trying to catch up with their peers, trying to get to their potential. That takes extra resources to make that happen. And then, of course, we talked about investing in long-term district additional assistance, so we have some sustainability in that area. And then career and technical education as well. That is becoming so important in school systems. I don't think it's known well enough that this is the pathway for many of our kids to be college or career ready, to be workforce ready. I see it in our district. We have a 52-48 ratio, males and females. We've never had that ratio, and we don't have males that are going into the college track. So what are we going to do with them? Career and technical education is what they are gravitating towards. So increasing the opportunity, being workforce ready, helping us to build our own workforce in our own communities through career and technical education. So I think those are some things that can be sustainable. And then anything on top of that, that one-time funding to fuse money into that can be kind of like the ESSER grants have been. Those have been stimulating for our district. They're one-time monies. They're something that we can put into, like, for example, technology. And we wouldn't have been able to do the things that we've done without ESSER funds. But where are those funds going to be in 2 years to be able to sustain the replacement of Chromebooks and internet access and hotspots and those kind of things? So I think there's a great opportunity for some sustainability in the base level support, as well as some of those additional weights.
And to follow, if I may, Greg, and then I'll be quick. I want to talk a little bit about innovation that these funds have allowed us to really move forward with. Those one-time funds that the governor and the legislature have provided to us in the last couple of years are very appreciated because they've allowed us to start the process of looking at education differently in terms of how we're interacting with those dollars and what we're providing for our students. And an example of that is the collaboration between the Arizona Rural Schools Association, the Department of Education, and the governor's office called the Final Mile Project, where they are investing funds that will have long-range impact over time for students in rural communities, where they're going into these school communities and creating broadband access for students in their home. And the more that we are able to look in those kinds of investments, those kinds of innovations, and how we're doing things and how we're providing education, the better off all students are going to be across the state, not just in our rural communities, but all communities.
And I think, Gary, if you really want to put a number, I mean, the numbers that have been thrown around, if we just go off $1 billion concept, I think you're talking 80-20, 80% into some form or fashion of the base, whether it be weights or otherwise, and at minimum, the rest being a one-time piece. But I think it even goes further. If we want to talk sustainability, we want to talk predictability, even as we look, there's a lot of people that are concerned about a potential recession coming up. What do we do with the rainy day fund? Is there earmarked dollars in the rainy day fund just for public education? The last time we went through this issue with recession, we got hammered, both K-12 as well as higher ed. And so is there a way to take a look at the rainy day fund and earmark a portion of those dollars that would go towards public education as a safety net in the event of a potential recession? So I think there's some fundamental thought processes that are going to be different when you talk about funding of public education than maybe has been in the past. Again, we can't thank those that have given us the money before, the governor and legislature, enough, but we do think the opportunity is here to really jump us forward. The notion that has been floated of $100 million for CT grants would create innovation. And I'll just use the East Valley. We have many Silicon Valley taking place out here with all the businesses that are coming in. And so our ability to change what we're doing for our kids in our CTE programs, to start doing coding, to start working in the technology field would be great, but we're going to need that initial investment. And that's an opportunity for the CTE portion that many people have talked about. So if you really want a number, I think you really, in order to be sustainable and to keep it working, it has to be somewhere in the neighborhood of an 80-20 that goes into the base in one fashion or another versus the one-time dollars coming in.
Excuse me. So I got a question from the audience. She asked it quite a while ago. Janice, she starts off by saying a fantastic panel. So what has been the most significant investment you made with ESSER dollars that will need to continue post-COVID with state funding?
I would jump in there and say that I think technology has been our greatest investment. We didn't have the resources to be able to go to a 2-to-1. We've utilized some the education connectivity funds as well as the ESSER funds. And then we've also increased, our classroom environments for ventilation, some HVAC, and also some really incentivizing our teachers to work with our students after school during the summer and being able to pay them an equitable rate to be able to incentivize our teachers working during non-contract time. That has helped us as well. I think those are probably our three most significant investments, which are classroom environment, classroom culture type, and as well as services to students.
We were similar, but we also invested in professional development. We brought our teachers back for 3 days earlier to go ahead and do some professional development with them. And that's obviously something in the long term we'd love to find a way to continue working with our students and bringing in some software that allows kids to, in our district, we speak to learning at any time, any place, anywhere, and the ability to bring in technology and have access to software programs anytime, any place, anywhere. To supplement what's being done in the classroom is critical for us. And so we've invested in any number of different areas related to that. And again, when we do that, that means working with kids throughout the day after school. We've got a program in place that allows for homework that kids can access 24/7 to get homework help. And it's all sorts of innovative, creative ways to make sure we catch kids up.
We've been real careful about not tying those dollars into personnel because we have a concern that once those dollars are expended, we may not be able to continue to pay those people moving forward. So we've done a lot with updating our fleet for our transportation department, ensuring that we have a modern fleet. And then we've done some deferred maintenance around our campus with HVAC system updates and ensuring that we have some airtight buildings so that we're able to provide a safe and healthy environment for our staff and students to learn within.
Anyone else want to chime in on that, or shall we move on to the next question?
To move on.
Okay. Here's another question from the audience. Should we have specific funding formulas more tailored to rural district needs apart from larger district funding formulas? I mean, we've got mid-sized, rural, and large here. So
sure. And there's been a lot of different weights that we've heard discussed during the last few weeks, whether it's an opportunity weight or a tribal weight or a rural weight. Special education, of course. And my response would be rural districts are different enough that we want to ensure that all of them have flexibility in how those dollars are being spent. And the best way to do that is to put those funds into the base so that once those dollars are there, the individual district can determine how best to utilize them for those students and their needs. That would be my response to that. I understand that rural and remote have different challenges as relates to supply issues and personnel, and those things are more expensive oftentimes because of where they're located. But having that money secured in the base means that there's some sustainability, there's some predictability, and then there's flexibility in how they can be utilized.
I would agree with Melissa that I think the base level support is the most important aspect. I think there is some There's some interest in that rural weight because the cost of operation for rural systems of getting contractors to come and do a project. We just did a HVAC unit replacement at one of our buildings, and we replaced swamp coolers to air conditioning. We did about 25,000 square feet, and it was at just under $1 million in August. We're bidding out a project that's at 28,000 square feet, so only 3,000 additional square feet, and it's $2.4 million. So, there is a cost associated with getting a contractor. There's costs associated with transportation. There's costs associated with recruitment and retention. We've mentioned the housing. That's becoming a major issue for us as our teachers. I have over 30 staff members that don't live in Holbrook. They live elsewhere because of housing and the quality of houses, as well as the quantity of housing that we have. So there are some dynamics that do play into it. And then another variable is, administrative costs and oversight. We're writing, as rural superintendents, and Scott mentioned, we're writing our own grants where we don't have assistant superintendents. Our principals don't have assistant principals because we're very conscientious about making sure that we're not top end heavy. We want to make sure that those dollars do go into the classroom. So everybody is adding more responsibility onto themselves. And so even being able to reduce that administrative burden in some way to be able to have enough staffing to keep up and to produce the results that we want administratively and in the classroom. I think those are the real variables, but I don't think there's necessarily a need to change the formula directly for rural schools.
And if I could jump in too, because I know I've seen the chat coming by with a lot of questions about consolidation. And I think people need to understand that the notion of consolidation is much more complex. And so when we talk about rural weights and rural schools, I was in Payson for a number of years. You're not going to consolidate up there because it's really, even though it's close to the valley, it's isolated in the sense it's 85 miles in any direction to another community. So you're not going to transport kids that far. You have to understand that it's not a case of someone says we shall consolidate and everybody comes together. You have to have votes of the public in all the different districts that are going to be there. And you have to go ahead and start to look at tax rates. You have to look at all these different factors. And you have to remember the school system is the heart of the community, especially in rural America, rural Arizona. And so the notion that we're just going to give up our school and become part of another district is not necessarily set well. So when you go to a vote of the public on a local level, there's a very good chance, irrespective of what everybody thinks from the outside, that you're going to get a yes vote to make the consolidation take place. And you're not going to save the tremendous amount of money that everybody talks about, because when you have people spread out over wide areas, you still have the needs for that. Unless you're going to put kids on buses, we already had them on up at Robbie's area for an hour, 2 hours. How much more are you going to put them on a bus? So you have to keep many of these schools in that community, which means you still have to keep the teachers, you still have to keep the counselors, you still have to keep the custodians, you still have to keep the food service, et cetera, et cetera. So consolidation may work in some cases, but it's not the panacea solution, because it's a very, very complex issue that takes on multiple communities and multiple entities. And from the outside, it may be a no-brainer, but internally to those communities, that's their lifeblood, and they're not ready to walk away from their school system. What their kids or their grandkids, all went to the system, or grandparents went to the system. And so consolidation is always looked at. That's why it's so important people understand how effective and efficient school districts are in running their operational expenses in comparison to other professions, because we're trying to get money into the kids. Again, I love the idea of the consolidation, but the practicality is not quite the same when you get into those communities, because they may not view it the same way an outsider, so to speak, would view the idea of consolidating school districts.
And the other thing I'll follow up just very quickly, Greg, is that when you're talking about economic development and how a consolidation will impact the local economy of an area, it will decimate it. It will decimate it. So we want to ensure that we are continuing to have those vibrant workforce opportunities in those rural areas where typically those consolidations are discussed.
I'd like to throw in back to the question about the base versus percentages. By putting money into the base, it allows communities to continue what we're so proud of in Arizona, and we celebrate local control. So in Yuma, for example, our career and technical education just since 2015 has grown exponentially. from 53 to 74 programs, from 5,097 students to 7,700 students involved in career and technical education. We have close to 1,000 students that are in AP and career and technical education. By removing the barriers, you allow communities to remove barriers for students. It should not be our choice if a child is going college or career or military. By infusing the dollars into the base, providing the flexibility to districts, it allows districts to work with their students individually and provide those opportunities that are powerful for them to become great Arizonans and community members. And each community is very different.
Right. Well, it looks like we're up right at 1 hour and it's time to close the show. I just want to say thank you to the panel for showing up and taking time out of your busy schedules to do this, and thank Stand for Children Arizona for putting this on, because without them, we couldn't have done this today. And thank the audience for tuning in. And we're going to be having another morning scoop on May 24th. It's going to be on water, so we hope that everybody can also make that. And everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.